very much. Tajahau, I would like to give you a Rotterdam perspective, which will be perhaps slightly different from what we've been discussing so far. And my comments will be based on some of the work done by my colleagues at Rotterdam School of Management, our business school at Rotterdam, Erasmus University. And they do a lot of research, management research into what makes ports effective. Since I was asked to comment on the free trade zone perspective, let me first begin by saying that free trade zones are not so popular of late in Europe, despite the fact that we've had many examples here of successful free trade zones in Europe in the past. Actually, most of them are being dismantled right now or have been dismantled recently, even the most famous one that we had in Europe, which was in Antwerp, in Germany, in Hamburg. And the reason why these free trade zones in Europe are not so popular anymore is that the regulation is becoming more and more stringent, and that regulation has to do with the administrative and physical control of shipped goods. Arguably, one might say that the entire European Union is now a free trade zone, but that only applies when you live within the European Union, because if you're a farmer in Africa, you will find that it is actually not that easy to ship your goods to that so-called free trade zone in Europe. So I would like to talk a little bit about Free Trade Zone 2.0, if you like, and focus on new types of innovation, such as customs control mechanisms and safe and secure shipping lanes that make up the determinants of a successful new type of free trade zone. And the key notion that I'd like to use there is the notion of strategic connectivity, because that is the notion that will actually improve the trade flows between, in our case, the port of Rotterdam and the rest of the world. And hopefully there will be some lessons to be drawn also for China. So when I went to school many years ago, I learned that the port of Rotterdam ranked number 1 in the world. Now the top 10 in terms of gross weight ports of the world are mainly in China. The first number 8 are in China, and I think number 9 is now Singapore. And Rotterdam sort of sits, well, depending on the measures that you look at, around the 9, 10 or 11 spot in quantitative terms. So in terms of throughput, Rotterdam has dropped. However, the competitiveness of a country is not solely determined by quantitative terms, by quantitative indicators. Qualitative factors are probably as important as quantitative indicators are if you look at the competitiveness of a country. And then the hub role comes into place, and hubs determine the strategic connectivity, as Ms. Panciao just eloquently showed for Hong Kong. So let's look at some of the more qualitative aspects of a port that create that competitiveness. And if you think about competitiveness, let's think about competitiveness in terms of the World Economic Forum rankings, where the Netherlands in 2013 ranked number 8 in terms of its global competitiveness, and by comparison China ranked number 29. Now this is not to bash China in any way, and Holland is only a very small country. We only have 16 million people, so that's probably as much as central Shanghai has. But still, that small country does rank number 8 in terms of its world competitiveness. And if you look at what determines that world competitiveness, we can see that the port infrastructure, the quality of the infrastructure, actually makes all the difference for our country. So let's look a little bit at how do ports contribute to the competitiveness of their country. What can governments do to enable that competitiveness, and how can then this strategic connectivity help us to increase the competitiveness of a nation, of a port, and in case of Shanghai, how can the free trade zone help the competitiveness of China? And then we look at, well, let me just see, I probably have a picture here. I talked about all of this. So I think there's several recommendations from the research. First of all, increasing the strategic connectivity within the port area of Shanghai. Secondly, within China as a whole. And thirdly, with international ports outside China. We have, as a government, basically two instruments to impact your connectivity. The two main instruments that you have are investments and regulation. Investments is clear. The Dutch government has invested highly and heavily in the port area to make sure that it increases its competitiveness, but also in terms of regulation. And then we think about tax and customs regulations. Let me give you one example. In 2007, the Netherlands introduced the instrument of Authorized Economic Operator Certificates, AEO certificates. And those certificates, it's like a self-help instrument. Once you're certified, you get less control by the authorities. You're controlled less strictly. It saves time in international trade if you have less control. But the real innovation comes when you begin to certify entire value chain, entire supply chain, as we saw in the Hong Kong examples. And that is where the smart and secure trade lanes were introduced between Rotterdam and other ports. And then you begin to certify end-to-end supply chains. Now, you may argue that smart and secure trade lanes are a bit of a jargon. What's the difference between the Silk Route, that had a major impact on the French fashion industry at the end of the day? Well, I would argue the Silk Route is probably a predecessor of the smart and secure trade lane. However, it was neither smart nor secure. But that is what we have today, and I think also since 2011 there is a smart and secure trade lane in place between Rotterdam and Shanghai. So the challenge is to innovate beyond just establishing a free trade zone, and I think that will really increase the strategic value of the port of Shanghai and thereby China as a whole. So I have a few recommendations that were given to me by our researchers at the Rotterdam School of Management. When it says here, connecting the diamonds between the two sister cities, this is a bit of management jargon, and I apologize for that. The diamonds is based on the research of Michael Porter, who has a 5 diamonds framework. I won't get into that. If you're interested in that, you look it up. Porter says there are basically a number of factors that determine the competitiveness of a nation, and you can also apply that to regions or to firms. Factor conditions is obvious, demand conditions is obvious, but actually some of the softer issues are equally important, like firm context and supporting industries. So if you connect these different factors to each other, you will speed up. Innovation is really the point here. And if we do all of that, then we will increase the innovative-driven competitive advantage of the Shanghai port and the port of Rotterdam, and we will all be happy and live happily after. Thank you very much for that.